to Publishing by the Numbers. It is somewhere in the middle of February. I got to the point I was always telling you the date, and then I was listening to myself and realized that at least twice I've screwed up the date that it came out. But theoretically, it's going to be the 19th of February when this comes out. And we are on episode 19. Is it hot in here or is it just me? I'm Jana S. Brown, and joining me today is my amazing co-host, CJ and Aya.
Hey guys, nice to be here.
Yeah, we love being here. Virginie has bowed out on this one because with just 2 episodes on romance thus far, she has had enough.
Enough.
She does not wish to romance with us anymore, and she will be rejoining us as soon as we are no longer talking about all of this, gushy mushy stuff. And I think she's missing out because we're going to have fun today, but that's okay. We will tell her how much we missed her and, talk about her behind her back because it's fun.
Exactly.
So what we're going to talk about today, a little while ago, we told you we're into getting into the great debates of the authoring publishing world. So we talked about plotters versus pantsers. And today we are yet again being brave, and we are going to launch into the debate of how we define content levels in romance. This is a big thing where you have the biggest argument is clean on the one side and erotica on the other side, and people argue a whole lot, and they say that just because something isn't clean doesn't mean that it's dirty. It doesn't mean that sex is dirty. It does all these things. So we wanted to kind of bring it up and talk about the 4 major divisions that we see, why content matters, and kind of what you can do about it. So CJ.
Yes.
Do you want to start us off over on the clean chase side of the board and tell us what does that mean?
So if someone is expecting a clean or chaste, just keep in mind this is the terminology we've been given. Okay, we don't want anyone coming at us later for it.
We did not make this stuff up.
We did not make this stuff up. So if something falls under the clean or chaste level of, I guess you could say the heat level within a romance, you do not have any sex scenes. There's not any swearing. There's no violence. When it comes to kissing, it's very light kissing. You don't have heavy, descriptive, passionate kissing. Okay, so this is very, this is low level stuff here. Okay, so usually this is going to fall under that clean and wholesome. Again, not our terminology. This is a category within Amazon. It's called clean and wholesome romance, where if there is anything even like hinting at, sex happening behind the bedroom or anything like that behind the bedroom door, like this just does not happen in these particular books. And most folks who read these books are not expecting that to happen. So if it were to happen, they would be a little bit taken aback. Okay. Now, here's the thing though. Sometimes people who enjoy, steamy books or something a little heavier, they can read these books and they're just fine. They just need to know that's what it is. It needs to be made very clear that within this particular book, none of this sex is happening. And as long as those expectations are made clear, then anyone who's used to reading books with a lot of that kind of explicit intimacy in them, it's like, oh, well, I'm knowingly choosing to read this. That expectation is set, and you're not going to get a really weird, crazy review where it's like, hey, there was no sex in this and I hate this book. Although sometimes you will, because people just fail to read anything these days on the
I got one of those. I got one where I lost a full-on star because there was not enough sex in the book, and it was like, oh, well, okay. So we had a slight mismatch there, but yeah, that totally happens.
Yes. You want to talk about sweet, our next heat level?
We tend to see it called sweet or sweet with heat. This is where you're going to get heavier kisses. You're going to get more than one kiss in the book. Very often in clean, when there is a kiss, it's kind of where the book ends. Is that the whole book drives to the point of that sweet kiss, that very tender kiss is your happily ever after. In sweet, you tend to get more kisses. They tend to be heavier kissing. You might get some making out. You'll get fade to black sex scenes, especially between married couples, though also between unmarried couples. But it stops at the door. And you get what I call biblical swears. And that's your, I don't know which ones we're allowed to say here. So it's the hells and the dams and as my grandfather would always put it, what comes out of the south end of a northbound cow, all of those kinds of words. You're very light swearing. In suspense and in suspense, romantic suspense, yeah, things like that. You might get a little bit more violence. You get the chase scenes, you get gunfire, things like that. Most of those make it fall into this sweet level where it's going to have a little bit more going on. And again, people expect that. And that's kind of what's going on there. So what happens when we go from sweet to steamy?
We have a little bit more going on there in that in that particular type of book. So you are going to get some explicit sex scenes. Usually the format is like anywhere from 2 to 3, I believe. When you start to go beyond 3 or more, usually 4 or more sex scenes, then that can lead into the land of erotica a little bit. It just kind of depends on those expectations. You will have swearing. There can be F-bombs. There will be violence, and other content like that is acceptable. I see this mostly with, like the darker romances as well. Although plenty of, I would say bachelor billionaire romances, contemporary romances, they go to that steam level, but you're not going to see nearly as much violence in those types of romances as you may in like a dark mafia, in a sports romance, in a darker romance, paranormal romance, something, a dark fantasy romance. Those are the types of things where violence will be a little bit more in play there. So that's kind of the stuff that you will see in that. And then erotica is kind of, it really is kind of a genre unto itself. Do you want to talk about that too, Jana?
Yeah, I can totally do this. So erotica is a matter of, how much content there is an aspect that's there. And like you say, that's usually somewhere around the 3 to 4 sex scene plus. And intimate sex scenes. These are full-on graphic detail kind of sex scenes. We don't close the bedroom door. We're moving along from there. Lots of, swearing generally doesn't have any restriction to it. You can sometimes get graphic violence or horror. You get a lot of kink play in erotica, multiples, BDSM, all of that kind of thing. Now, we're not saying that any of this is bad. By the way, just as a full-on thing here, none of this is a moral call. It is an expectation call, like CJ was talking about. It's understanding that these levels change who you market to. And so for audiences who love erotica, they love it and they love all of these things, all of them. And so it's not saying, ooh, these are bad. It's just saying this is what the expectation is. And with erotica, the way that you fashion your storylines tends to be different. Erotic romps really are about the sex. They are not necessarily, you can have a romantic through line and an emotional through line, but you tend to have less of those. It tends to be a little bit more about the sexual activities, about the different things that you can do with the different people, all of that kind of thing. In all the other content levels, there really is a heavy reader expectation for an emotional through line. And the content of the sex scenes, it's very important that you have emotional connection happening through that as well. The reader really expects that, whether they're explicit or whether it's fade to black. It's all about what is the relationship connection and the emotional connection that's being made there. And you'll see some of that in erotica, definitely. Nobody yell at me or anything. But a lot of erotica also moves away from that, where it is a lot more about being creative and sex to sex to sex, because that is the focus, is sexual exploration, expression, different things. So again, you might see storylines there, but you don't see as much. And a lot of audiences don't expect a really, really gritty, detailed plot line where they're having to deal with these other things, because the focus is on what's going on between the couple.
Right.
Did I miss anything?
No, I think you got everything. I was just kind of thinking about tropes a little bit, because we talk about how most tropes can really cross all of those different romance sub niches, but there is one particular trope that I was just thinking of where it is very heat specific. And I'm sure there are more, but that is just reverse harem tropes. I've never actually seen, and that's not to say there isn't any out there. I've never seen a reverse harem trope used in a clean and wholesome romance or anything squeaky clean like that. And if you're unfamiliar with reverse harem, that trope, and really it's almost become its own kind of category, even though it's not
It's totally its
necessarily
own
listed.
category.
Yeah. It's where the female has several men who are her boyfriends or her husbands. And I believe that is an interesting shift of women taking their power back. It's good times right there. But you can imagine the nuances of that and all of the different, kinds of things that you would include in that. So I've never seen that in anything lower than steamy and up, really. And then can you think of other things that are very steam specific as far as tropes or?
Well, on reverse harem, I have seen young adult reverse harem and that kind of thing that kind of fall in the sweet and the chaste as far as how much explicit detail they get into. But
Okay.
when you're talking about audiences, your clean and chaste audience generally does not accept multiple partners,
Mm-mm.
even if you're not getting into the detail. I've seen a lot of sweet that has the multiple partner, and that's not a problem either. But yeah, I generally don't think that most people do not consider multiple partner, even with no explicit detail, as
Mm-hmm.
being a clean or chaste read. Now, again, you guys, you can argue over every single one of these, and believe me, authors do all the time, and readers do all the time.
All the time.
And we're not trying to set it up and say this is gospel truth or anything like that. But I think if you're not aware and you're thinking about going into romance, you do need to be aware of this because it is something that's really specific.
Right.
The other ones I'm thinking is, like you were saying, a lot of the really dark romance, you don't see that in clean and chaste very often. Not unless it crosses into being more like a gothic romance where the setup is dark and it might have a lot of psychological stuff to it, but it doesn't have as much physicality. But like a lot of the motorcycle club romance, I don't think I've ever seen a clean and chaste motorcycle club. Not that I am saying people shouldn't do it. If you're writing some of these things and you're doing it in various places, please let us know because that would be kind of cool. But yeah, Mafia, those ones tend to be pretty aggressive. Dark fantasy or just dark romances, especially because a lot of those do play with some of the taboos around things like consent, and violence within a relationship and taming bad boys in ways that can sometimes get they're just taboos. And while a lot of people really do enjoy reading about taboos, that does put them kind of in their own category. So I guess we could say that some of these categories are about the specific content, but some are also about the tropes and the themes that you're embracing. And if you're embracing a lot of those darker tropes and themes, there is definitely absolutely an audience for it. I was just reading one of Alex Newton's K-Lytics reports on romance, and dark romance and erotic romance are both seeing rising numbers. They're doing very, very well. So again, we're not saying one is good and one is bad, but you do need to understand the expectations of your audience because you don't want to surprise them, not in that way. Readers like to be surprised by interesting characters, interesting turns of events. They do not want to be surprised by a book that has content that they are not expecting.
Yeah.
And an interesting thing is readers who read more explicit content, there we go, they will tend to read further on the other side of the scale than clean and chaste readers reading upward on the scale, if you want to say there's an upward and a downward. And that I've seen to be fairly true. I look at, my sister who loves to read romance, and she is very much a sweet, clean, chaste kind of thing. She can go that far, but she is not going to read anything else in these other ranges. And then I've had erotic readers who say, yeah, I love a good erotica book, but I read this beautiful, sweet Amish book and it was a beautiful romance and I loved it just as much. And you tend to see that more. Now, that again, no hard and fast rules, guys, because some people will read anywhere depending on the trope that they like, the things that they're looking for, but you do tend to get that sway. So let's get into the why does it matter, CJ? I mean, we kind of hit on it, but let's be explicit here.
There are a couple of reasons. One is if you are going to develop a series or you're going to develop a specific romance pen name, then content matters and heat levels matter. Certain content levels are going to matter. And if you jump from book to book to book and series to series to series, doing variations of those and never really quite remaining steady, that's going to cause problems. So for example, we have seen students and clients come to us and say, I have 2 series, 5 books in each series under one pen name. It's all romance. It's not selling. Don't know why. We'll go in there. We'll take a look at the covers, take a look at the book descriptions. And if we're not really seeing any problems, then we're going to go look at content. A lot of times that is where we find the problem, is that the first book in the series was a sweet, clean, chaste romance. The second book in the series went from 0 to 60 in 2.5 seconds and was full-blown erotica. And so when you change those content levels within a series from book to book, you are changing who you're marketing to, which doesn't make sense, because you need to be able to market to the same audience throughout the entire series and also specific to your pen name. So there are some pen names in romance that can shift and stay within certain sub niches, but there are other types of romances where you do actually have to separate things. So a young adult, clean and wholesome pen name for romance, that probably needs to stay under a specific pen name if you're going to then jump to erotica or even really, really steamy adult romance, because you don't want the same youngsters. And I know that older people read young adult fiction too. I'm not saying they don't, but you don't want those youngsters who do read those, or anyone expecting that type of level of romance, to then follow you to these newer books and possibly a different series under the same pen name, where they're like, oh, whoa, that is a little more than I was expecting. And so you're not going to get the same read through. Some might, like Jana said, there are no hard or fast rules, but the goal is to get that same targeted audience through that series to the next series, to the next series. And the standard way to do that is to make sure that your content is consistent, and that speaks to branding. So if you don't understand all of these content levels, then you're not going to understand that you have in fact not branded your series correctly if you have not been consistent with these content levels. And that will cause so many problems. And it's such a bummer when we discover that, because then that requires rewrites, or it requires people to split their series up and try to navigate and figure out how that would work. Sometimes they really just have to go in and start over in some cases. And so, you can get creative with how you repair that, but it's always best to just never have to deal with that in the first place. So if you can do it right from the beginning, you can avoid those unfortunate pitfalls. So that is why it's important. Can you think of anything else, Jana?
Yeah, I think those are our biggest things. And we'll talk about other genres later and how content comes up in each one of them. It's a big deal in romance, though. I can't think of any other genre where people fight so much about exactly where the lines are as they do in romance. And that is a funny thing. And I think it's because we're dealing with intimate relationships, and we are so far into the relationship as the focus of the story that it matters to people a lot more than, like, fantasy readers. The difference between fantasy violence and really extreme fantasy, grimdark violence, that's a pretty, there is a difference, but people don't argue about it nearly as much. It's like, okay, in the one we have heads rolling and blood spurting and viscera, and in the other one less so. The blood splats go off the screen. Right. And so we just don't argue about it in the same way. We argue about magic systems and other things instead. So let it not be said that we don't argue in the other genres, but this is one of those heart of romance arguments and discussions, and it makes a huge difference to the reader. One of my favorite stories is my writing partner writes wonderful fantasy stories with really strong romantic subplots. So she gets a lot of romance readers who also read her books because they love those romantic, really strong romantic subplots. And she has one book where she got a review from somebody, and all it is 2 words in giant capital letters with exclamation points on both sides, and all it says is "not clean." It is her favorite review ever because she has no idea where somebody came in with that expectation, because it's not one. She writes sweet. And so you get some kissing, you get some making out and whatever. But apparently the makeout scene in this book, which to me was really, really mild, pushed this reader right over the edge of being not clean. And it's like, so sometimes you can't control this, I guess, is part of the point of that. Sometimes no matter how you try to, brand and say, this is what the other books are like, this is, the covers I'm choosing, all that kind of thing. Sometimes you'll still get that expectation. The person who expected more sex in mine, the person who really expected a whole lot less making out in hers. So some of that we can't control, but we do control what we can. We do express what we can to build up that brand, because when people think of your pen name, we want them to think of your whole brand. What does that mean? And we want them to want to read everything that's in that brand. And when we break it up too much for them, when we make those things, we do cause a problem. So, and you went into that in lovely detail, so I'm not going to. Yeah, we don't have to repeat ourselves. It's fun, but we don't have to. So this is a thing to be aware of, guys. If you are writing and you go into a, because I saw this the other day too, you go into a writer's forum, like a Facebook group or that kind of thing, and you say, I've created this, I think that it's a clean book, but it has XYZ scene. Okay, first of all, if you have to say, but it has XYZ scene, you're probably not in the strictest definitions of clean anyway. But when you put it up and then people come back and they all say they're uncomfortable with it, you have your answer. And just because we want it to be something, it's not about what we want it to be. It's about how did you actually write it. And you can't make that justification. Now you can a little bit, because some clean readers, and this happens in each one of these, is that we have a spectrum all the way from chaste to erotica, but then inside of each one of those, we also have another spectrum. So you do get some clean readers that very seriously say you should not be noticing body parts at all. No oogling cute chests or muscly arms or eyeballs or whatever it is, whatever physical attribute does it for you. They don't want to hear about that at all. They want their romances to be very, very squeaky clean. It should be about emotional journey and that part of the relationship altogether. Ooh, that is the furthest extreme.
I've got a good example of that. I got nailed by a reviewer, 1-star review for My Fair Assassin, because she didn't like it that they had a hug and that Krista was flush against Jareth's chest when they hugged. Apparently that sentence needed
that hugging, my goodness.
I know. She was really, really upset about that and said that I had made her feel incredibly uncomfortable. And on the one hand, I was like, oh, that's really, because to me, it didn't seem like a big deal. They were hugging and so forth. But some people are just like, man, this is not my cup of tea. So yeah, that's a good example of how there are spectrums of what is and isn't acceptable, even within each level. And you've got to decide whether you're getting enough of those. Maybe you should pay attention to that, or whether it's just a few here and there. And that's just not something you can, it was the only person who had ever said that. So I wasn't too worried about it. But you got to pay attention to those things. So.
Yeah, and if you are getting a lot of comments from reviewers along these lines, you might be targeting the wrong market. You might have to look at it and say, maybe it's not really a chaste audience, and I don't want to be in those categories, because we don't want to be in the wrong categories just because they're popular categories. We've talked about this before, because You want the right audience. That's the audience who's going to come back again and again and again. So make sure that you find where your categories go. Now, I do have a suggestion here. The writing gals, they're really, really nice ladies. They have a Facebook group and probably a web page and all sorts of neat things. One of the things they did is they kind of built this cheat sheet that goes 1, 2, and 3, and it builds out. And I will link to it in the show notes, because it starts with the, what is considered squeaky clean, what is considered that next level, what is considered that next level. So for a lot of people, a lot of writers especially, that chart can be a really good thing to go to and kind of say, for what I've written, where does it fall? And then chase those markets, because that's going to get you the right kind of readers, with the right kind of readers being the readers that want to read the kind of work that you create. And it's not that the others are wrong, as much as we kind of go, so sometimes it can feel a little bit pearl clutchy, but that's really how they feel. And because publishing and reading is subjective, we need to give them that and just say that's not my ideal. That's not my target market. Oh, I will note one other thing. If you choose to write erotica, you're going to have to think about your marketing.
Oh yeah.
Because marketing erotica is hard. There are communities that you can get involved with where it's a lot easier. And to be honest, if you're wanting to move erotica, it's easier when you're wide, because Amazon has some really funny restrictions around erotica. Some people call it getting stuck in the erotica dungeon, for all the various reasons and double entendres that you can think of there. And you can't run Amazon ads to erotic content. Also, when you're marketing through promotions and things like that, there are certain swear words are not allowed in your description. Certain kinds of covers cannot be sent out. And that's not the promo places being pearl clutchy, but because there are rules from the FCC as to what we can send out in email. So you do have to think about that if you're going to go into that category, there is a really big audience there, but you're going to have to think of ways to get to them that are not necessarily what we traditionally teach or what we hear about, simply because some of that content is a problem when it comes to what we can send out an email, what you can publicly advertise. And those are legal limits. Those are, again, not, Amazon is not taking a moral stance about it. They just know that they don't want to get fined by the FCC for sending out things that the FCC won't let you do. And some of those rules are different from country to country. So you do have to be careful when you brush up against taboos, cultural taboos, because that does sometimes change marketing.
Excellent. Yep.
All right. That said, here we go. What is irrelevant in your world today, Miss CJ?
I have found the most delicious gluten-free cookies. And for you, my friends, who get massive migraines if you eat something that is not gluten-free, and yet you will eat that chocolate chip cookie that is not gluten-free anyway, just because the gluten-free cookies are horrific and taste like cardboard. I have found some delicious, wonderful gluten-free cookies that do not give me migraines. So I just wanted to take a moment to say that, breathe it in, because it's no fun to have to take ibuprofen before you eat dessert, because the dessert will kill you.
Okay, so what are they called? And we'll link to them.
Okay, so it's the double chocolate chip. And now I've forgotten it. I am just the queen of this every time, and this is why I need to write things down. You can get it at Safeway. Go to Safeway's gluten-free aisle.
We will make CJ look it up, and we'll put it in the show notes, guys.
I will. I'll look it up. But go visit Safeway. They've got gluten-free sections. If you don't have a Safeway near you, go online and order it and have it shipped to you, because online cookie purchasing is my favorite. So
it's totally a thing.
It's a thing. Yeah.
Fantastic.
What about you, girlfriend?
Oh, the irrelevancy in my life is also food-based today. And it is public service announcement. Always, always wash your sharp knife after you have cut an onion.
Oh.
Because when you come and you see that sharp knife sitting there the next morning, and you do not remember that you cut an onion with it, there are no visible marks upon the sharp knife that tell you that you cut an onion with it. And then when you cut up the apple that you are serving everybody for breakfast, you get onion juice on all of the slices of apple. And everybody takes a bite and looks at it and goes, "What is wrong with this apple?" Because it's Honeycrisp, and we like Honeycrisp, and it's not bruised or anything else, and we just barely bought it, but it tasted so weird. And I'm sitting there eating this apple going, what in the world? And then it hit me what that alternate flavor was. And it's like, oh, I apparently did not rinse that knife, even though I set it on the drawing board where it would go if I had rinsed it. So
Right.
I think subconsciously I had rinsed the knife and
Mm-hmm.
then put it on the drying board. But no, no, no,
Mm-hmm.
no. I did not rinse the knife. And onion and apples, guys,
I think that
not so
sometimes
tasty.
we it's all about wishful thinking when it comes to tasks we want to do and hope we did, and our mind's like, pretty sure I did that.
Yep, yep.
Moving
I was certain that I had done that, and not so
on.
much. So we'll
Tasty.
have apples tomorrow that will not taste like onion because now I have scrubbed all the knives and put them away, and that probably teaches me something else about what drives me to do the dishes. All right, CJ, thank you so much. And to everybody who's listening, thank you for joining us. You can find the show and the show notes at www.elantumdigital.com and follow the podcast on YouTube or your favorite podcast distributor. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe and leave us a review. We'll see you all later.
Hi, guys.